So funny story, I actually tried recording this about an hour ago. I started uploading it and I realized my mic wasn't on while I was shooting it, so I recorded it again, and that time I had actually plugged in the wrong auxiliary, so my mic wasn't on again. So this is actually the third time I am recording this video. And I did it right this time. I did a sound check and everything. Alright, so I'm going to go over how to run a one-way within groups ANOVA in SPSS, or a repeated measures ANOVA. So we're going to start with our data view, which is actually here. This is what it's going to look like, our Excel spreadsheet looking thing. We're going to move over to variable view right away, and we actually have to essentially replicate what this box looks like into data view. First, we have to name some variables. So it's typically good practices to list your participant ID. So our first variable is going to be participant. So then we're going to head over to data view and we'll just list the participant numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, just like that. Usually it's going to be like a 3 or 4 digit number for purposes, because I'm lazy, apparently. I just made it 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, but usually there'll be longer numbers that you can use to identify a participant without actually like knowing what their name is, to keep it all anonymous. This is also a good way to keep things very separated, very organized. So we're going to go back over to variable view. We have 3 more to enter. We have 3 groups here, one for cheap beer for each participant, one for mid-range beer for each participant, and one for high-end beer for each participant. Remember, in a repeated measures or within groups ANOVA, we've got participants and they're measured across all conditions. So we've got a score for participant 1 for cheap beer. I think it was like how much they liked it on a scale from 1 to 100. Mid-range beer, they got a 30, and high-end, they got a 53. So first, we're going to just name all of these variables. So we've got a condition for cheap beer. Here's a fun thing about SPSS. You can't add spaces. So if I do something like that, cheap space beer, variable name contains an illegal character. The space was arrested for illegal spacing. It is now being detained, and everybody's real sad. So no spaces, unfortunately. But what we can do, there are a few ways to get around that. What I'm going to do is just call it cheap. What you can also do is just do one word, cheap beer. Not cheap bear, cheap beer. Or you can also do an underscore. I think underscores are legal. Yep, cheap beer with an underscore works. I'm just going to call it cheap though. Next we've got mid-range, and then we've got high-end. High-end. So all this gets filled out for us. We don't need to do anything with the rest of these things in this row, except for one thing. And this is really just up to personal preference. So participants 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. They have decimal points there, and they're not really necessary. So what you can do, SPSS by default goes to 2 decimal places, but this in variable view, you can change it. So you just select one and just move it down to 0. And I'm actually going to do this with all of them because we're not really working with decimals here. And voila. So all those decimals are gone. It's good for just clearing up a bit of clutter so you don't have all these unnecessary zeros all over the place. I just think it looks nicer. You don't have to do it. Obviously, if you are working with decimals, you're not going to want to do that, but none of our data has that, so we're not going to worry about it. I just got rid of them. So now we're going to enter all of the data for each participant. So participant 1 got a 40 on cheap beer. We'll enter that 40 under cheap and participant 1. Their mid-range score was a 30. And again, I'm just pulling this from this PowerPoint right here. This is also in your book, I believe. And they got a 53 on high end. Same for participant 2. They got a 42 on cheap beer, 45 on mid-range, and a 65 on high end. We're just going to do that for each participant. We need to be real careful that this all lines up very accurately, because if one number is off, it's kind of like the statistics apocalypse, and everything is on fire, everybody's screaming, nobody's happy. So I'm actually going to double check my work after I do this. 38. So I'm just going to make sure that these numbers line up with these numbers. We got a 40, 33. Yeah, yep. Yes. Okay, I think we're all good. So there's the easy part. The hard part comes when we analyze it. So we go to analyze, and this is a new one. We hit general linear model, and then repeated measures. This is our repeated measures ANOVA. I have to get rid of this here. Okay, so this is what the screen is going to look like when you come up to it. And because SPSS likes pain and suffering, it doesn't really tell you what to do here. So I'll tell you. Whoop, don't want that to happen. All right, so I'll tell you what to do here. When it says within subject factor name, what it's really asking us is, what's our independent variable? What are we measuring? Or no, not what are we measuring. What are we changing? What are we manipulating? And what's changing between conditions is the type of beer that we're giving participants. So I'm just going to call this beer. That's our independent variable. That's really all it's asking. Number of levels is basically how many different types of beer are we measuring them on. So we can see that we're measuring on cheap beer, mid-range beer, and high-end beer. We've got 3 conditions, or 3 groups, or 3 levels. And then we'll add this. So all this is saying, it's going to come down here. We've got a independent variable. It is called beer, and we have 3 levels of that independent variable. That's all that means. Measure name, we don't do anything with that. Don't mess with measure name. Hit define, and we will approach another very confusing screen. So it comes up with these little question marks with numbers in parentheses automatically, which don't make much sense right off the bat, but what they're really getting at, what they really mean is, okay, so what are we measuring first? What is the first measurement that each participant is given? So you can see our first condition is cheap. So what we're going to do is we're going to head here, we're going to hit cheap, we're going to arrow over, and then it says, okay, we're measuring cheap beer likeness first. All right, so what are we measuring second? Well, our second condition is mid-range beer. So we hit mid-range in this repeated measures box, we arrow that over, and okay, now it's saying, yeah, we're measuring this variable second. We're measuring the mid-range scores second. And what are we measuring third? High-end. So we just arrow that over. What I'm going to ask you to do, I don't think you need to do this actually, but what you do need to do is hit descriptive statistics down here. It's not going to be boxed, but you want to do that. So again, you're going to be on this screen. You want to hit options and check descriptive statistics. And just for practice, it couldn't hurt to do this. This is what it's going to look like originally. You want to select overall and put that over in display means for, and hit beer and put that in display means for, hit compare main effects. You don't need to do anything with this now, but when we do two-way ANOVAs, we're going to be using this, I believe. I need to brush myself up on that again before I make that video, but descriptive statistics is the most important one. So we'll hit continue. This is all we need here. So now we're just going to hit OK. It's going to give you like 10 boxes, maybe more. There are 2 that you really need to pay attention to. Descriptive statistics is the first one that you need to pay attention to. You can't do a whole lot really mathematical or scientific with this. But what it is good for is giving you a sense of what your data looks like. So we've got each of the conditions, cheap, mid-range, and high-end. We've got each of their means, standard deviations, as well as their ends, or the number of participants in each group. So we had 5 participants total, and they were being measured 3 times in each, or once in each condition. So it makes sense that it's just 5 across all of them. If we compare the means just kind of by looking at it, We can see that cheap and mid-range, kind of the same. High-end, though, has like 18 points higher than any of the other two. So that's probably where our difference is going to be if we get a significant difference. Again, this is not like the right way to analyze this. It's just a good way, I think, to visualize the data before actually really digging into it. I think that's really important to do. If I get to post hoc tests this semester, that'll actually show you how to get into it in a statistical way. But first, it's just good to kind of look at the descriptives, see what you're working with. Next, we're going to scroll down a little bit, and we're going to go to the tests of within subjects effects box. And this looks like a big mess, but I can tell you right away, we don't need to look at like 6 of these rows. So the important thing that we need to look at is this very, very top row that says sphericity assumed. I'm not going to explain what that means because it's kind of complicated and honestly you don't need to know it yet. But this is where you're going to be getting most of your numbers in this row, sphericity assumed. Go over, and here's your F value. F is 14.765, and we'll check the PowerPoint to see if that's right. Can't remember. There we go. We got 14.77. So that's basically, yeah, that's right. So this first F value in this first row is what we're looking for. That's our F value. That's what we're going to report. Next to that, we have our P value under SIG. 0.002 is our P value. The next two numbers you need on this top row is our between subjects degrees of freedom. And actually, I'll bring this back up just so we can see that again. So remember when we calculated this, we have DF between of 2. That's right here. It tells us right there. We also calculated a DF within of 8 for this project, or for this problem. Well, that's actually down here under the other sphericity assumed column or row. So when you report your statistics, you need these 4 numbers. This DF, the F value, and the P value under SIG. And what that will look like is F parentheses 2, 8, end parentheses equals 14.765, comma, P equals 0.002. And I think that's all you need to know. So practice that a couple times. It's a little tricky, but you'll get it.